Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another weekly edition of my legal presentation, Legalese, where we discuss important legal issues that affect victims of personal injury, accidents, motor vehicle accidents, and my clients generally, and Florida consumers. Well, something really recently has happened that's been very, very interesting for Florida drivers. As some of you may know, approximately 6 weeks ago, the legislature passed the first mandatory bodily injury statute in Florida. As some of you know, for the past 50 years or so, Florida has operated under a no-fault scheme of auto liability. And basically what that means is that for the past 50 years, no matter who's been at fault in a motor vehicle accident, your own insurance will cover the first $10,000 of your medical bills at 80% and lost wages at 60%. This coverage falls under your personal injury protection, which is part of your insurance policy and is mandatory coverage under Florida law. So for this many decades, policies have been required to carry at least $10,000 of personal injury protection benefits on a driver's policy, and it would pertain to the driver as well as the owner of the policy, who the owner of the motor vehicle policy itself. Excuse me. Lost my tongue there for a second. But essentially, the benefits that would be granted would be $10,000 and minus whatever deductible that you might carry. So recently, the legislature passed a bill that abolished this altogether. The no-fault paradigm that we've been operating under for the past 50 years was legislatively overturned. The new bill that was introduced into the Senate under Senate Bill 54 passed both houses of the legislature, passed the House of Representatives and passed the Florida Senate, and essentially was voted into law by the legislature. However, under the purview of his powers, Governor DeSantis decided to veto this bill. So what would this bill provide if it had been passed and signed by the governor or pocket vetoed by the governor? If it had passed, it would have required that each driver in Florida carry $25,000 of mandatory bodily injury coverage. That's the kind of coverage that you carry in case you hurt somebody else driving a motor vehicle. Your policy would then cover their injuries and their out-of-pockets. So what we had seen there was a shift from the no-fault paradigm or model in Florida to a fault paradigm or model in Florida. So rather than the no-fault, where your first $10,000 is paid by your own insurance company under the new statute, that would not exist anymore. No-fault benefits, personal injury protection would completely have been wiped out. And you would be simply pursuing the at-fault party for your damages, whether they be economic or non-economic and so forth. So that's very, very important to know. However, the veto of that bill by Governor DeSantis means that the mechanism that's been in place, that no-fault system, remains in place. So even though the legislature passed the statute approving the mandatory bodily injury and abolishing PIP, the governor didn't agree with it. He vetoed it. And for the legislature, it's going to be back to the drawing board in the next session. But very, very important to know that. So what does this mean for Florida drivers and motor vehicle owners? Well, it means that you need to continue under the same policies that we've had for the past 50 or so years. You're going to continue to purchase auto policies. However, this gives you an excellent opportunity to reevaluate your coverage. One of the worst things about the no-fault system is many insurance brokers had been passing it off as being some kind of full coverage for insureds. So they would be saying, well, you're fully covered, but all you really have are the mandatory coverages of bodily injury, of property damage liability in the amount of $10,000 and no-fault benefits in the amount of $10,000. So they were calling that full coverage, but it wasn't full and it wasn't even complete coverage. You always would need a lot more. Bodily injury liability, for instance, is always something you can carry. Now, whether the legislature and the governor make it mandatory and pass and sign off on the statute, if everyone needs to carry bodily injury liability on a policy, that's fine. But whether you're required to carry it or not, you always can, simply by purchasing it from your insurance company, from your insurance broker, and not being talked out of it to purchase a cheaper policy. Buying auto insurance is not one of the places where you want to go cheap, because you will potentially pay out of pocket. Like I say, anything that you do not insure yourself for through a policy of insurance, you become self-insured for. And you would become personally liable potentially for damages you cause someone else if you are not covered under bodily injury liability, or you're covered under inadequate bodily injury liability. You should think of carrying at least $100,000, $300,000 in bodily injury liability, and also covering uninsured motorists as well. You want, if you're going to take out the bodily injury liability, which you should, whether it's mandatory or not under the statute, you want to also consider getting uninsured motorist coverage in those same amounts, so that you protect yourself in the event a vehicle that causes an accident and injures you or your passengers or your loved ones will then, if they're not carrying bodily injury liability, because it's not required, then you want to have the uninsured motorist coverage to make sure that that is taken care of, so that your medical bills, so that your pain and suffering and your economic and non-economic losses alike can be taken care of. So it's amazing what's happened. Now a lot of credit has to go to some attorneys, the Florida Justice Association, for engineering and creating this statute, this bodily injury liability statute. It's really an amazing thing. It actually passed both houses of the legislature, which it historically has never happened. So this is pretty incredible. And the attorneys and the folks with Florida Justice Association and the president of that organization really should be applauded for their efforts, because they were able to accomplish what has not been able to be accomplished in approximately 50 years. It's almost like getting universal health care in the state of Florida. Getting mandatory bodily injury seems to be a similar sort of struggle or task to get that done, but they did a tremendous amount of work, and they should be applauded for their efforts and their dedication to Florida consumers. There's controversy as to whether it would necessarily be the best thing, and a lot of confusing financial analysis came into play, particularly toward the end of this process. However, at the end of the day, the governor decided that more information would be needed before such a statute can be passed. That was his decision to make. However, we have to appreciate what the attorneys and the members of the legislature that tried to pass this bill were able to accomplish, despite the governor's veto. Unfortunately, they couldn't prevent that from happening. So, what does that mean for Florida drivers now? It means take a look at those policies of yours, and if you're only carrying PIP or your no-fault benefits and property damage liability, then you need to add bodily injury liability, you need to add uninsured motorist coverage, and you need to add MedPay coverage to your policies. I strongly recommend this. In fact, get with an insurance representative that is reputable and is going to take the time and not try to talk you out of valuable coverages, things that you're going to need. But right now, at least for now, until the legislature passes another version of the bodily injury, mandatory bodily injury statute, and the governor signs off on it, this is going to remain the state of affairs. So you have to continue to do what Floridians have been required to do for the past 40, 50 years, and that is protect yourself. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Nobody really is going to be interested in protecting you as much as you are. And you can always do that simply by not relying upon what the government requires you purchase under the mandatory coverages of PIP and property damage, but by rather purchasing those coverages from the insurance company, like bodily injury liability, uninsured motorist coverage, and additional supplements to no-fault benefits like medical payment coverage. Just the way you'd purchase comprehensive and collision for a brand new vehicle. You want to make sure you have all these coverages to take care of the person, because the person is more important than the vehicle 10 out of 10 times. You know, a vehicle can always be repaired, a vehicle can always be replaced, a person cannot be, and you cannot buy good health. And remember, if you do not carry bodily injury liability, then you're self-insured for any damage you cause somebody else. In fact, this often results in people losing their driver's licenses, because if you're underinsured and an injured person's medicals total more money than you're able to pay for, or is even covered under a low policy, then the fact that this can get reported to Tallahassee and you can lose your driver's license, and your license can become suspended. If you're caught driving with a suspended license, misdemeanors the first 2 times, then the third one could be charged as felony. So this whole process is really, really something you should think about. Purchase bodily injury liability. Purchase uninsured motorist coverage. Purchase medical payment to supplement those things that remain mandatory after the governor had vetoed the mandatory bodily injury liability bill. So, folks, that's all I have for you this week. It was short, but I just wanted to get that information out. There was a lot of talk, and I just want to maybe clarify a few things. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask me. Like I said, if I can answer your questions, I will. I dedicate entire segments to your questions. And if you like the content that you heard today, please feel free to hit that like button and share or comment below. I appreciate your comments. And folks, I thank you very much and look forward to seeing you again next week. And just everybody be safe out there on the roads. Thank you.